I never expected the day my mother's will was read to feel more like a battleground than a family occasion. We sat in the oak-paneled conference room at Green Making Associates, where the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. My father was across from me, sitting stiffly with a sneer already etched on his face, as if daring me to say anything. To him I had always been just a waitress, someone who had no right to speak, no future and no respect. My brother, Ryder, lounged beside him, wearing that arrogant half-smile he had perfected since high school. When I tried to speak, my father's voice cut through the room, harsh and commanding. "You're just a waitress. Shut up and sit down." I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I turned to my mother's lawyer and nodded once, signaling that I was ready. That moment marked the beginning of everything falling apart. I was 28, still living in the small Montana town where I was born. Most of the people I grew up with had left, pursuing college, careers, and families elsewhere, but I stayed. Some might think I stayed out of fear or a lack of ambition, while my father would tell you it was because I couldn't make it anywhere else. He would say it with the same condescending smirk he had worn since I could understand the meaning of failure. But the truth was I liked my life. I worked double shifts at Rosie's Diner, serving coffee to truckers passing through, and saved every penny I could. My life was simple but honest. My customers knew me by name, and my boss trusted me. But to my father, none of that mattered. He measured worth by paychecks and titles, things I didn't have. Then there was Ryder, my older brother, the golden child. Ryder moved to Denver after college, got into real estate, and never missed an opportunity to flaunt the expensive condo he owned or the luxury SUV he drove. Every family gathering felt like an unwelcome competition that I never signed up for, but always somehow lost. My father lavished praise on him, while I was lucky if I got even a nod of acknowledgement. My mother, however, was the one who balanced everything out. Grace Miller was soft-spoken, with hands that always smelled faintly of lavender from the soap she loved. She saw me, not just the waitress with the small apartment above the laundromat, but the real me. She would tell me, "Paisley, you have more grit than both of them combined." And for a moment, I would believe her. Things started to change 2 years ago when Mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. At first, we all thought she'd overcome it. She had that quiet strength that made you believe nothing could touch her. But the treatments wore her down, and the sparkle in her eyes began to fade. Despite never complaining, I was there through her chemo sessions, the late-night nausea, and the mornings when she couldn't get out of bed. I learned how to make her favorite tea just right, the way she said it tasted like home. I would sit beside her in the hospital, talking about the weather or the funny things customers at the diner would say, anything to keep her mind off the pain. Dad would come when he could fit it in, always checking his watch, as though sitting with his dying wife was taking time away from something more important. Ryder visited twice, each time snapping photos for Facebook with captions like, "Cherish your loved ones." The comments flooded in, calling him a devoted son, but I saw the truth, and so did Mom. One night, when it was just the two of us, she looked at me with eyes that had grown weary but not dull, and said, "You'll understand someday why I've made certain arrangements." At that moment, I didn't fully understand what she meant. But sitting in that conference room, as her will was being read, I realized I was about to find out. When Mom's cancer returned after her second round of treatment, it was like watching an inevitable storm rolling across the plains, unrelenting, and impossible to stop. The doctors spoke in clinical terms about the aggressive recurrence and limited options, but all I heard was a clock ticking louder than ever before. I cut back my hours at Rosie's Diner to spend more time with her. My savings slowly dwindled, but I didn't care. Every extra moment I could sit by her side was all that mattered. Being at my mom's hospital bed, reading to her or just holding her hand, felt like a fleeting moment, slipping away in my grasp. Dad still showed up, but it always felt superficial. He would inquire about her medication in front of the nurses, then retreat to the hallway to make calls. His voice was louder there, sharper, almost like he was speaking to contractors or clients. I overheard him one day saying, "She's not going to last much longer. We'll need to get the house appraised." My stomach twisted, but I stayed silent. Ryder was even more detached. He walked in with designer sunglasses, carrying expensive bouquets like they were props. He'd sit on the edge of Mom's bed, lean in for a selfie, and post it with captions like, "Love you, Mom. Stay strong," while his followers showered him with praise and heart emojis. He never stayed more than 20 minutes. One evening, after Ryder had just left and Dad was too busy to visit, Mom asked me to close the blinds and sit closer. She spoke in a whisper, like she was sharing a secret. "Paisley," she said, her voice soft but clear, "there are things about your father and brother you don't know." I told her I already had an idea, but she shook her head. "They've been counting the insurance money," she said, her lips tight, as if I was just a transaction waiting to be processed. I had overheard them talking about it a month ago. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to confront them, force them to look her in the eye and admit it, but she held my wrist, stopping me. "No," she said. "You'll have your moment, but not now." Then, she reached into the drawer beside her bed and pulled out a small black USB drive. "This," she said, pressing it into my hand, "is what I want people to hear if they try to silence you." I stared at it, feeling its weight, far more than just plastic. "I've also made changes to my will," she added. "Marion Green have all the documents. She knows what to do. When the time comes, trust her." I didn't fully understand why she was telling me this, but I nodded. Her trust in me felt like a heavy responsibility, one I never expected to bear. Weeks later, when the call came that she was gone, I knew the storm had finally broken. But I didn't know that the real upheaval was yet to come, waiting for me in a quiet wood-paneled room, facing my father across the table. The last month of Mom's life was a blur of antiseptic smells, quiet hallways, and the steady beep of machines. Her room was always dim, the curtains drawn to shield her from harsh light. I spent most days beside her, reading from her favorite mystery novels, though I wasn't sure how much she could follow anymore. Dad's visits became shorter. Sometimes he didn't come at all. When he did, his conversations were brief, his eyes flicking to his watch as though time were more important than she was. Ryder's visits grew so rare that the nurses began asking if I had heard from him. I hadn't, not directly. I saw his posts though, smiling at charity galas, skiing in Aspen, always with captions about family first. One evening, just after sunset, I came into Mom's room to find her sitting up straighter than she had in weeks. She was pale, but there was a spark in her eyes. She motioned for me to close the door. "Paisley," she whispered, "promise me you won't let them write my story." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She reached for my hand. "At the will reading, your father will try to control everything. He'll try to silence you. Don't fight him then. Just do what we planned. Trust Marion and play the recording if you have to." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to tell her I would stand up for her, but something in her tone told me she already knew that. 2 nights later, she slipped into a coma. I stayed by her side all night, holding her hand and tracing the veins on her skin like they were maps to places I would never visit again. At dawn, she was gone. The days after were mechanical, arrangements, condolences, and awkward silences from people who didn't know what to say. Dad barely looked at me. Ryder only texted once. "See you at the reading." The night before the will reading, I sat at my kitchen table, the USB drive lying in front of me like a loaded weapon. I thought about plugging it into my laptop to hear what Mom had recorded, but I didn't. A promise is a promise. When morning came, I put on a simple black dress, tied my hair back, and slipped the USB into my purse. Outside, the wind was sharp, the kind that carried dust across the road like a veil. It felt fitting, like the air knew something was coming. By the time I walked into the oak-paneled conference room at Green & Associates, Dad and Ryder were already there, seated like kings at the head of the table. Marion sat at the far end, her briefcase closed, her hands folded, her eyes calm but unreadable. I took a seat opposite my father. He didn't greet me. He just smirked, as if he already knew how the story would end. Marion cleared her throat. Voice held just enough strength to command silence. "We are gathered here today to read the final will and testament of Grace Miller," Marion began. I clasped my hands together in my lap, my fingers brushing against the USB in my purse. The sensation was a constant presence, steady like a heartbeat. Dad reclined in his chair, arms crossed, his posture exuding control. "Let's not drag this out," he said, his tone dismissive. We all know what this is going to say. Ryder let out a low, smug chuckle. Yeah, Marion. Skip to the part where Dad and I handle the estate. No offense, Paisley. His eyes lingered on me, filled with mockery. I said nothing, my gaze fixed on Marion, who gave me the faintest nod, a silent reminder to stay on track. Marion began reading the formalities, the legal preamble, the dates, the statements from the witnesses. Dad's fingers drummed impatiently on the armrest, while Ryder scrolled through his phone beneath the table. When Marion reached the section about personal statements from the family, I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I'd like to say a few words before we continue, I said, my voice cutting through the stillness. The room seemed to freeze. Dad's eyes snapped to me, cold and unyielding. No, you're not speaking here, he said flatly. I straightened up. It's about Mom. He leaned forward, his voice low, but sharp like a blade. You're just a waitress. Shut up and sit down. Heat rushed to my face, but I kept my voice steady. I have just as much right to speak about her as anyone in this room. Ryder smirked, the corner of his mouth twitching in disdain. Come on, Paisley. Don't make this weird. Let's just finish up. You can write a Facebook post later or something. For a split second, I considered arguing, letting all the things I'd held back over the years spill out. But then I recalled Mom's voice in that dimly lit hospital room. Don't fight him in the moment. Just do what we planned. I closed my mouth, resigning myself to silence. My quiet submission seemed to please them. Dad leaned back, a smug expression returning to his face, as though he had won. But underneath the table, my hand brushed against the USB in my purse. I met Marion's gaze, giving her the smallest of nods. She returned the gesture, her lips pressed together in quiet resolve. Without a word, she flipped to the next page in her folder and said, Before we proceed to the distribution of assets, there's an addendum to address, one that Mrs. Miller specifically asked to be heard aloud in the presence of all beneficiaries. Ryder stopped scrolling, and Dad's drumming fingers froze. Marion glanced at me again. I reached into my purse and placed the USB on the table. The small, black device seemed to grow heavier as the room fell silent. This, I said softly, is Mom's voice, and she wanted you both to hear it. I pushed the USB toward Marion. Without hesitation, Marion took it, inserting it into the small speaker beside her legal folder. The soft click as the port locked into place felt louder than it should have. The screen on the speaker lit up, and Marion pressed play. At first, there was only the quiet rustle of paper or fabric. Then my mother's voice filled the room. This is Grace Miller, she began, her tone calm, deliberate, just the way she spoke when she wanted you to listen. If you are hearing this, it means I am no longer here to say these words myself. Dad shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. Ryder leaned forward, brow furrowing, his attention fully caught. I have spent my life in this family, Mom's voice continued. Loving 2 children and sharing a home with a man I once believed I knew. But in the year that passed, I came to realize harsh truths about both my husband and my eldest son, Ryder. The room was eerily quiet, except for my mother's voice. She started by saying, I know you spoke of me as though I were already gone. I know you discussed the insurance payout and how it would be split. You spoke of it not with sorrow, but with eagerness. Dad's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair, and he muttered, This is out of context. But Mom didn't stop. I want everyone here to understand that while my daughter Paisley may not have the titles or wealth you value, she has been my foundation. She stayed with me through every treatment, every sleepless night, every time I needed someone to hold my hand. She is the one I am most proud of. My throat tightened, but I kept my gaze fixed on the table. Then, addressing my husband and Ryder, her voice became cold as steel. You will receive nothing from my estate. I have revised my will, and my house, my accounts, and my insurance will go entirely to Paisley. This is not out of spite, but out of justice. You did not value me in life, and you will not profit from my death. Ryder's face twisted with disbelief. This is absurd. Marion raised her hand. Let the statement finish. The recording ended with Mom's voice softening. Paisley, my love, live your life free of their judgment. And remember, if there is another life, I would still choose to be your mother. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, almost suffocating. When Marian removed the USB, the room felt smaller, as if the walls had closed in. Dad's face was ashen, and Ryder nervously bounced his leg under the table. Neither of them looked at me. Marian gently placed the USB on the table. "Now," she said, her voice steady, "we will proceed with the reading of the revised will." Without hesitation, Marian adjusted her glasses, opened a sleek leather folder, and began to read. "This is the last will and testament of Grace Miller, drafted and notarized on the 14th of March, in the presence of 2 legal witnesses." Her voice was clear and precise, each word sealing my father's fate. Clause 1. All outstanding debts and medical expenses will be paid from my estate before distribution. Clause 2. My primary residence at 418 Willow Creek, valued at $420,000, will be transferred in full ownership to my daughter, Paisley Miller. Dad jerked forward, his voice rising in anger. "Hold on, that's the house." "Our house." Marian didn't respond. Clause 3. The contents of all bank accounts held solely in my name, totaling $212,000, will be transferred entirely to my daughter, Paisley Miller. Ryder's chair screeched across the floor. "This is insane. She can't do that. I'm her son too." Marian's gaze remained unflinching. Clause 4. The beneficiary of my life insurance policy, amounting to $1 million, has been changed from John Miller to my daughter, Paisley Miller. The air seemed to compress. Dad's face turned crimson, a vein bulging at his temple. Ryder's mouth opened and closed as if unsure whether to shout or curse. Then Dad erupted. "This is fraud. She was sick. She didn't know what she was signing. Paisley manipulated her." I could feel the heat of his words, but I kept my hands folded and my voice calm. Everything Mom did was her choice. She knew exactly what she wanted. "Lies," Ryder shouted, pointing at me. "You were there every day, whispering in her ear, turning her against us." Marian closed the folder, her voice as firm as steel. "The will was witnessed by 2 independent parties and notarized. All legal requirements have been met. If you wish to contest, be prepared for a costly and public battle, Mr. Miller." Dad's chair scraped loudly as he stood so quickly. It nearly toppled over. "I'll take this to every court in Montana if I have to." Marian replied evenly. "Go ahead. The recording you just heard will be entered as evidence." For the first time, Dad hesitated. Ryder looked between us, his confidence faltering. We deserve something. You can't just cut us out completely." I met his gaze and replied, "You already did that when you treated her like a bank account instead of a person." The room grew heavy with tension. Outside, I could faintly hear the hum of traffic, the distant bark of a dog, mundane sounds that seemed out of place in such a charged moment. Finally, Uncle Grant, Mom's older brother, who had been silent until now, spoke. His voice was low but authoritative. "John Ryder, you should be ashamed. Grace was my sister. I saw how Paisley cared for her when you wouldn't even lift a finger. This will is fair. You've been selfish for as long as I've known you, Ryder. And you've learned nothing but the wrong lessons from your father. If you had any sense of decency, you'd leave quietly and let Paisley honor her mother without tainting it with your bitterness." Ryder's face turned a deep shade of crimson. "This is a joke," he muttered, glaring at me, his eyes narrowed. "Enjoy playing queen of the house until the tax bill hits." I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say that Mom hadn't already said for me. Dad grabbed his coat, cursing under his breath, while Ryder followed, slamming the door so hard the glass in the conference room windows rattled. Once they were gone, the air in the room seemed to finally relax. Marian closed the folder and slid it towards me. "It's done," she said. "Everything is yours now. Grace wanted you to have the security she never had," she added. I nodded, my throat tight. She gave me more than security. She gave me her trust. Grant placed a hand on my shoulder. "And you honored it today." For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, and I could almost hear Mom's steady, warm voice, proud, calm, and reassuring. I realized then that this, more than the house or the money, was the true inheritance she had left me. When the door slammed behind Dad and Ryder, the silence that followed felt heavier than any argument could have. I sat still, my hands resting on the table, as though releasing them would cause the entire moment to crumble into a dream. Marian began collecting her papers, calm and composed, but she glanced at me. "They'll make noise for a while," she said. "They'll threaten lawsuits, try to intimidate you, but the will is airtight. You're protected." I nodded, though the unease in my stomach remained. "They won't forgive this," I said. Grant snorted lightly. "They don't need to. Let them wallow in their own bitterness. Your mother knew who you really are, and that's what matters." As we walked into the hallway, I overheard bits of conversation from the relatives waiting outside. Some of them seemed sympathetic, others curious, while a few looked uncomfortable, as if learning the truth about Dad and Ryder had shattered some long-held illusion. "She left everything to Paisley," I heard one whisper. "Well, after what those two did, I can't blame her," another replied. I kept my gaze forward, not letting their words affect me. Outside, the fading afternoon light bathed the parking lot in golden shadow. I could see Dad and Ryder in the distance by Ryder's SUV. Dad was gesturing wildly as he spoke, while Ryder jerked his head in quick, sharp movements. They didn't look like a unified team anymore. They seemed like two men blaming each other for their failure. Grant walked me to my car. "Do you want me to follow you home, just in case they decide to escalate things?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. No, they've already lost the only battle that truly mattered. The rest is just noise. Still, I checked my mirrors all the way back home. When I pulled into the driveway, the place felt different. The same porch swing, the same peeling paint by the gutter, but it was mine now. Not because of money or legal papers, but because Mom had wanted me here. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. The first thing I noticed was the faint smell of lavender, the scent of the soap she always loved. I wasn't sure if it was real or if I imagined it, but I breathed it in anyway. I placed my purse on the kitchen table and gently set the USB beside it. I didn't feel victorious, I didn't feel rich, but I felt steady. Somewhere in the stillness, I thought I could still hear her voice, telling me to live free from their judgment. And for the first time in years, I believed it. 6 months passed before the tension in my shoulders began to ease. The calls from Dad stopped after 2 months. His threats of lawsuits faded into silence once Marian's letters made it clear he had no case. Ryder sent one last jab through a text. "Enjoy the house while it lasts," but I didn't reply. I think that stung him more than any argument could have. The house became more than just a place to live. I painted the kitchen walls a warm cream, just as Mom had always wanted. I kept the porch swing, oiling the chains so it wouldn't creak in the wind. In the living room, I framed one of the few photos of us together, me in my diner apron, Mom laughing beside me with a coffee mug in her hand, as if sharing some private joke. I continued to work at Rosie's Diner. People asked if I planned to quit now that I had money, but I liked the rhythm of the place. The regulars still came in, still called me by the same names, still offered that small-town familiarity. If anything, the money gave me the freedom to work because I wanted to, not because I had to. Some quiet evenings, I'd sit at the kitchen table, the USB drive in my hand. I never played it again. I didn't need to. Every word was etched in my memory. Her pride, her love, her warnings. It felt strange, knowing her voice was trapped in a small piece of plastic, yet choosing to carry it in my memory instead. Uncle Grant visited often. We'd sit on the porch with coffee, reminiscing about Mom. Not the illness or the fights, but the small things. The way she hummed while making pie crust. The way she wiped her hands on her jeans after gardening. Those were the memories I wanted to keep, polished and cherished, not the sharp, jagged remnants left by Dad and Ryder. One windy afternoon in late autumn, I stood in the backyard, the sky the same pale gray as the day of the will reading. I thought about Mom's words. Live your life free of their judgment. Back then, it had seemed like an impossible wish. Now it felt like a quiet truth I had slowly grown into without realizing. I walked back inside, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. In the hallway, sunlight caught the frame of her photo, and for a brief moment, it felt like she was there, watching, approving, maybe even proud. I smiled, not because I had won anything, but because I knew I was exactly where she had always wanted me to be.